Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Hi, how are everyone? So today we are going to be checking Chapter 3, and in Chapter 3 we are going to cover industrial hygiene. And just to mention that we are studying from the textbook Chemical Process Safety Fundamentals with applications for the authors Daniel Kroll and Joseph Lover. It's one of the textbooks, one of the best that I had seen, and of course you know that we had considered this textbook in studying this topic, which is chemical process safety. Okay, so we'll talk about industrial hygiene. So we have two words here. I mean, the main word is hygiene, and today the word hygiene is like just everywhere, right? The word hygiene that we have here is just everywhere. And the word hygiene just gives you an indication that you just do your hygienic stuff, like putting sanitizers and cleaning your hands, and so you're protecting yourself, and you're putting some kind of controls and measures to protect yourself. And actually this is for yourself, but if you're talking also about your kids or your brothers and sisters, there are some rules and regulations at home, and you should clean your hands before eating, for example. So that is a rule, and so laws and regulations are important. And then what happens if, for example, if there was gas leak? For how long was the gas leak of the cylinder or the one in the oven? What could happen? What's the possibility of that happening? Could it happen or not? And if it happens, it's odorless. Oh my God, that's even more dangerous. So all of these kinds of things that just reflect an example of what you have at home, we are going to reflect it in an industrial platform. And the first thing that I just mentioned is that we want to get to know what are the laws and regulations, what are the laws and regulations, and actually how are they passed on in several countries. Well, the example I had here is for US, but we would like to know that how laws and regulations passed in Bahrain. So we do have two houses, right? We have the selected and the elected. And how do the laws and regulations pass through? And if you want to have some kind of a regulation regarding safety, is there a body is taking care of that so that it can push those laws and regulations to the parliament of the elected house, and then it goes to the selected one, and then the laws and regulations, of course, passed on and approved by the king, and becomes laws and regulations that should be obeyed. So is that in place? I think everything is in place. Maybe the thing that we are trying to target and hit on is there a body looking onto the safety regulations in Bahrain? Of course, there are some bodies in Bahrain that look for the environmental protection and for some kind of safety protections, maybe related to environment, not as specific to safety, but there is something. Of course, there is something in Bahrain. Okay, so what you're going to study, we're going to study laws and regulations, and then we're going to study together in this chapter the industrial hygiene steps. So there are 3 steps of industrial hygiene: identification, evaluation, and then control. So we are going to go through these 3 steps, and you're going to see that later. And then we are going to go to something interesting where we have some calculations in industrial hygiene. For example, if I have a toxic substance with a certain concentration, what is the how could I say that this toxic vapor concentration is toxic or not, right? It is harmful or not. So there are some calculations, and maybe it's not that toxic, but it depends on the exposure that you could have it toxic. And then if it is toxic, what protective equipment can we use, and so on. And it's not only talking about the toxicity of the concentration or the exposure. It's also noise. It's also heat, radiation. All these are also toxic. And we are going to calculate if that is acceptable or not acceptable. And as we have taken in Chapter 2, there is something called the threshold limit values, or the instantaneous dangerous to life and health concentration, or the permissible emission limits. All these are things to consider. So starting with the laws and regulations, definitely laws and regulations are the major tools, right? So you see, they are the major tools for protecting people and the environment. And in the US, you have the Congress is responsible for passing the laws. Okay, where does the Congress receive that from? So to put these laws into effect, Congress authorizes certain government organizations. So the Congress cannot do this job by itself. So it has who? It has the OSHA and it has the EPA. Okay, so I'm going to write them. It has the OSHA and it has the EPA. And the OSHA, they have set some kind of standards, and the popular standards is the process safety management. And EPA, they have also set some standard very well known as the risk management plan. And we are going to see those standards, like not into the details, just to get an idea that how the laws and regulations are built, and what are the details, or what are the elements of those regulations. And if we could have a good comparison, quick comparison between these two, that will also be nice. So for creating a law in US, a member of Congress processes a bill. Okay, اقتراح برغبة. I don't know if that is exactly the word or not, but the bill is like a document. Okay, it's a real document, and that has the details of becoming a law, and if approved, it becomes a law. So it's not اقتراح برغبة. Sorry for that. Okay, so if both houses of the Congress approve the bill, it is sent to the president. Okay, in our case, it will be sent to the king for approval, who has the option to either approve it or, of course, approve it or not. The complete text of the law is published in the United States Code. So it is published in a place code, and then because it's a federal government, so all the states will include this code in their federal laws. So this is how it goes. There's a bill. Okay, there's an organization, of course, they're responsible to do that, and the Congress receives a member of the Congress, congressmen, they call them, or the congresswoman, you could say as well. They propose the bill, and the bill could be a law if approved, and it should be approved by the president, and then it is registered in the USC, which is the United States Code, and then the federal laws, which goes, they have states, they do imply, or they oblige all the institutes or all the companies to oblige to that law. Okay, so that is how the create of the regulations goes through, and this is just to mention that for example, this is the OSHA, just to mention, and this is the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and this is their logo, when they hit in the logo, so this is part by them. Okay, so there's nothing to mention here about the regulations. And just an example, for example, a regulation related to Clean Air Act. So what did happen? There was a regulation specifying the levels of toxic chemicals that are safe and that could be emitted to the air. And there are penalties if they do not really satisfy those regulations. And based on that, and after the regulation is in effect, the EPA has the responsibility to do what? Of course, they need to help the citizens to comply with the law, because they still don't know, and then they enforce the regulations. So this is all part of enforcing the regulation. So now there is something called Clean Air Act. If there was nothing, you would find the environment could be very, very dirty, because people who like money, sometimes they don't care about anything except for money. Okay, and of course, as we said, that this goes into details to a federal register, and then it goes to the United States Code. Okay, and then through the United States Code, it goes to the Code of Federal Regulations. So I think so. This is very clear. Well, if just for a moment you think laws and regulations, they are very good and important. Did they have an impact? Did they have an impact since all times? Because the idea of having regulations was since then it was there. But what happened? Actually, it was there, but it was not, no one really bothered about it. So what I would say that during that era, staffs and funds were too small to carry out effective programs, and actually they did not really bother a lot about it. But after all the explosions that that happened in industries, and those the number of people who died, especially after the Bhopal, the one in India, that explosion that caused about 2,000 to 3,000 people dying. This is other than injuries, things became very serious, and this is why that the law started becoming like more obligatory, and there are penalties if they do not abide with that law. So in the 1970 US Congress enacted a health and safety law that continues to have a significant effect. So it has a significant effect on the industrial hygiene, the chemical industry, and this is part of what? Occupational Safety and Health Act. So this is called the OSHA Act. So that they have a kind of a law, and they are acting on that law. And a part of those people who do research, part of OSHA is the NIOSH people. And this NIOSH people, they do have responsibility measuring the health effects of exposure in the work environments. And they also develop the criteria for how to handle those toxic materials. And they establish the safe levels. Okay, sorry for that. They establish the safe levels and exposure, and they also train the professionals. So they do a really good job, those NIOSH people, part of OSHA. And that is the brand of OSHA that we have. And they just mentioned that as long now the OSHA is in place, it's enforced. So the employers or the industry, they must comply with those regulations, which means there are officers from OSHA compliance officers. They do some kind of safety inspections and audits to make sure that they are satisfying the regulations. Okay, and this is all by law. Okay, this is all by law. So they just cannot say that, no, you cannot enter my industry, you're not allowed to. No, there's a right of inspection, there's a right, and they then have the records, and they make sure if there's any danger, and if there's danger, they have the right to shut down the plant. Okay, so penalties can be invoked, and not only that, they also could raise that to criminal penalties causing the death of organisms or human beings. So imagine that how OSHA has the right of enforcement and pushing so hard. And what you can see here is that actually this is the place where it jumped. You can see how that really increased. And what you're talking about, you're talking about number of laws, okay? So with the year, the number of laws had increased very significantly. So this place, there's nothing increasing very little bit. But after 1960, it's mainly after the World War, right? Because of the World War. But things were not that important. But many explosions started happening, especially in the 70s. It jumped, and then the 80s also jumped again because there were also some problems there. It mainly started from 1970s, really jumping really high. Yeah, and imagine now the number of federal laws relevant to chemical process safety. Okay, so what do you want to mention now? We want to mention that the OSHA, as I have said, that the OSHA they produced some kind of a guideline or a publication. It is called the PSM, the Process Safety Management. And on the other hand, we already mentioned that we also had the EPA who published the risk management plan. So we are going to come to that. So those who published the final rule, okay, it had many rules, but the final one which came into being of a very integrated manner is called Process Safety Management of Highly Hazardous Chemicals. This standard is performance oriented, so it's based on the performance. And this process safety management was developed after the Bhopal accident. You can see how this really had an effect. so that this never happens again. And the PSM, if you open the book, you try to read more into it, there are 14 major sections, and these major sections include employee participation, process safety information, process hazard analysis, operating procedures, training, contractors, pre-startup, safety review, mechanical integrity, hot work permits, management of change, incident investigations, emergency planning and response, audits, and trade secrets. So you can see this 14 major sections. They are not few, and it's like an integrated book that has all the details of all these important standards. And just to tell you, these are like mentioning the laws and regulations related to every piece and part of those, and some also direct advices and how to implement those, or all of these details. And each one has even a detailed booklet that explains in details, for example, the process hazard analysis, which means that they do some kind of hazard study. So you enter a place and you see what hazard do you have, and then how to control those hazards, and what is the exposure to those hazards, if there were toxic materials that could be inhaled, and then do some kind of what if checklist, failed mode, and fault-free scenarios. So I know you don't know these, but we're going to take that in a later chapter. So these are some kind of techniques so that they can do some kind of an analysis to the hazard. So that is one booklet. Another booklet is how to write the procedures and policies. And there is something, you must have operating procedures, so it's must. And then how to write them, and instructions are given to clearly written and consistent with the process safety information. They should be written to satisfy that safety information. Also, there's another book here talking about guidelines for performing effective pre-startup safety reviews. So pre-startup safety review, there's a lot of safety issues regarding the startup and the pre-startup. And very similarly, there are also things related to the mechanical integrity. So there are safety issues related to the equipment, how to operate the equipment, high voltage or low voltage, the pressure that is within the equipment, the overpressure that happens within the equipment, and if there are places for leaks, what is inside that equipment, the piping, the type of piping, the valves that it with the piping, the relief systems that you're going to use when that's within the operation, and we are going to study the relief systems in another chapter in detail, and the controls and the alarms. All this is a part of safety, and the OSHA have developed the 14 elements, part of the process safety management. Hot work risks or hot work permits. If someone is going to work in a place that could have a risk, like welding, grinding, or using spark producing, these places could be dangerous. It could cause explosions. Not any person could do this. They need a certificate to do this. And the other thing that we want to mention is that it is mentioned the PSM standards, detailed safety precautions in the hot risks. And of course, there are policies and procedures for that, for anyone who's going to work on that area. And again, PSM standard also talks about the management of change, and it also talks about the emergency plans, if there's an emergency, and how to evacuate the people, for example, and how to put off the fire, or if there's an explosion, what will happen, and so on. So that was the OSHA and the 14 PSM elements, the standards. Okay. So, and on the other hand, we said that we have the EPA, which is the Emergency Protection and Environment Protection Agency, and it had set the risk management plan. And again, it's all because of those Bhopal accidents, everything just came into being. So EPA just published the risk management plan after OSHA, but it's still considered one of the good plans, and it's also very well developed. And both of them, they are pushing laws and regulations to the Congress to have acts that they can carry on. Okay, so I just want to mention that the RMP regulation is aimed at decreasing the number and magnitude of accidental releases. Okay, so they want to just decrease those numbers. It is similar. RMP is similar to PSM regulation in many aspects. However, the RMP is designed to protect off-site people and the environment. So they're protecting the off-site people and the environment. Whereas PSM is designed to protect on-site people. So it's not only the people who are working, even the off-site people who are not exactly on the site. RMP is considering even those people. Well, RMP came into business, right? How it could be different from PSM? It should do something different. That's why they need to consider something additional as in value. And they're going to be like two different things. And let me say that the PSM missed that point of off-site people. And it's okay. Both of them will complete each other. Okay, so both of them are required. Both of them are required. So I'll read that. The RMP is required for plant sites that use more than a specified threshold quantity of regulated highly hazardous chemicals. So, okay, because if you talk about highly hazardous chemicals, people who are on-site and off-site could get affected. The RMP is a set site responsibility, whereas PSM covers every covered process. It covers everything, however, on the site. Okay, so that's the main reason. In the RMP, they have they have many elements, but it all comes out from the three main items here, which is the hazard assessment, the prevention program. It's called the hazard assessment program, the prevention program, and the emergency response program, and of course all the documentations that are related to that. So what is the hazard assessment program, and what is the prevention program, and what is the emergency response program? Just to look at it quickly. So the hazard assessment is the analysis. It comes from the word assessment, right? So it is the analysis for all of the potential hazard chemical releases. Okay, so you do an assessment of all potential hazard chemical releases that are related to your industry, which means you need to go to the history and see what happened with those hazard chemical releases that you have in your industry. Okay, in your industry. And then you're going to calculate what are the worst scenarios that happen in those industries, and what is that reflected to you. And even you want to look at the accident release scenarios that could happen in your industry based on the history and based on the calculations as well. Okay, so this is the thing, that you're doing some kind of a hazard assessment on all of the releases of chemical. And when you do this, if you have a release, this is the area that could be affected, for example. But maybe it will be a bigger area that is affected, or it could be only that small area, or it could be a bigger area, and so on. And people get in contact with what? With all of these equipments, just to make sure that this equipment, they do not have any spark, and they are protected from having any kind of an explosion. So that was like this is a nuclear explosion, and this is a vapor cloud explosion, just to see the how big the explosion could be. So let's go again and look at it. I'm just going to rub this just to have a better look. Okay, so that is kind of a plume model of 1 ton chlorine spill. Okay, so that small nuclear distance. Oh my God, nuclear bombs, nuclear plants could be a problem. This is a vapor cloud, and you can see how that could be very toxic, causing fires or explosions. Okay, so we talked about the hazard. Just to go back, hazard assessment, which consists of the analysis of the hazards, and we need to know how do they disperse, how do they spread out, how they affect the whole surrounding, and all that is calculated. However, we need to know that this analysis this is an analysis and not the probability. Okay, so there is something missing, that it's not a true determination of risk. Okay, because usually risk talks about the consequence, but it talks about also the probability. This is just something to mention. There are always area for improvement. So we finished the hazard assessment program. The next one is the prevention program, and the prevention program of RMP looks very close to the 14 elements of the PSM standards, and we are going to compare between those. But before comparing them, we want to look at the emergency response program, which is the third program. So what is your response for emergency? And they have some kind of details also related to that. So I'm not going to go into the details, but I want to look at the comparison between the PSM and the RMP prevention programs. So you see, both of them, they have process safety information. Both of them, they have hazard analysis. Here it is called process hazard analysis, the PHA, the one that we have seen. And this is called the hazard evaluation, part of the hazard program, hazard assessment program. They have operating procedure. They call it here the standard operating procedure. They have employee participation. Here they don't have any employee participation because they also talk about offsite, so they did not include them. Offsite people, okay? Training, both of them, they have training. Contractors, they didn't have anything about contractors. Here, of course, the contractors are part of it because they're on site, okay? So they are part of the PSM. Both of them, they have pre-startup review. Both of them talk about maintenance, but here they call them mechanical integrity, which is related to the pipes, the valve, the equipment. Here they call them maintenance. Here they have the hot work permit. Here they have nothing in equivalence. Management of change, both of them. Both of them, they have incident, accident investigation. Here they call it incident. Here they call it accident. Emergency, both of them have emergency response. Both of them, they have audits. Here they call it compliance. Compliance, that means to a certain law. Okay, so they audit against a certain law. Here they audit very similarly, but they just call it safety just to reflect the meaning of it, the feel of it. Here they have something talk about trade secrets, because this also could be suffering the safety, especially if those secrets fall in wrong hands. They have here on RMP, they have nothing to talk about. However, they have risk assessment. And in this risk assessment, in which no equivalence in PSM, they could talk about the secrets part, and they also could talk about many other issues that could have been missed from the PSM. Okay, so we have finished the first part, which is related to the laws and regulations. Okay, the first part. And that was the first part related to the laws and regulations. Now for the second part of Chapter 3, talks about the three phases of industrial hygiene. And if you can remember, the third part is about the calculations that you are going to undergo in a moment. So now we are in the second part. We are at the second part of the three phases in industrial hygiene. I think so. This is good enough for where we can stop here. So we will stop here, and we are going to continue with you in the second part of chapter number 3, and that is related to the three phases in industrial hygiene. And most probably, it depends on how long we are going to take that lecture, we may continue with the third part as well. So thank you very much. All the best. We are going to continue that in the next lecture. Inshallah. Thank you very much.